I know that the steps that we're taking will be a real blow to many people, to everyone obviously whose wedding plans have been disrupted or who cannot now celebrate Eid in the way that they would wish.
Meow! Good morning, it's Huples Cat. I'm doing an update on COVID-19 on August the 1st. This is my birthday month and I'm going to head off and go canoeing and camping with Kitty in the wilds in about a week or so. So I'm quite excited by that, and I'll actually do an update video of the new place we're having built, if we can ever afford to pay for it, that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on some aspects of the news that I think is important to hear, because if you just scroll through news and stuff like that, it's overwhelming. What is clear, as Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said, is that putting 4.6 million British people back into lockdown unexpectedly and at quick notice is fairly disruptive. And of course he cancelled some foreign destinations for people to go to and said that they had to quarantine for 14 days or 7 days or 10 days, whatever they're using in England, when they came back. And the architect of the air bridge, the cabinet minister for transport, was actually affected by this because he was actually on holiday. And there is a rumour that the civil servants announced it to catch him when he was abroad. Anyway, hopefully it wasn't that petty. So the news from work is that we've had like 0 cases for about 3 weeks. We are now resuming. We've got 3 cases today, August 1st. So I'm going to be very interested to see just how fast our cases rise. We are as an organisation not ready to deal with hundreds of cases. I would argue we're not really able to deal with 50 cases. It's interesting, all of the steps we did, apart from a couple of them, have been wound back, and now we're having a busy trauma season and doing all the surgery we can, and the hospital's chock-a-block and ICU beds are in high demand, and we don't have enough staff. Because we've had 6 months to get enough staff, we've had 6 months to get enough beds, we've had 6 months to get enough equipment, and because of internal and external stresses, we haven't been able to get ourselves in the position where we can say we can deal with the wave, we can deal with a resumed surge. It's going to be trouble. If we have a surge in Toronto, it's going to be difficult, very difficult. One of the things is that yellow gowns are now out in the hospital, so they've got a bunch of cheapy white things that they've got for a week, and then they're going to run out of them. And as Stores says, gowns will be coming in a variety of sizes and packages from now on. So I do anticipate that moving forward they'll do the same thing with gowns that they did with boots and hats. They restricted them, and now they're restricting those hats and boots again. We're running out of basic, single-use, disposable gear at my hospital, and we haven't had a second surge yet. And then while I get on with the surge issue, you can look at the stuff from Johns Hopkins and various other sites. What you clearly see is a single wave phenomenon. There is, in regions and countries, ups and downs. To have a second wave, you have to have about 5 to 8 weeks of no real new cases, pretty much globally, or very certainly in a national area, and then a big resumption. So you could argue that Canada could be looking at a second wave, but it isn't. I'm arguing it's the first wave that we successfully stopped transmitting from person to person by lockdown, by government and by self, and it's now resuming because people are actually out and about and interacting with each other again. So that's going to be an interesting thing to follow. All of the talk about the second wave will be worse than the first wave, the second wave will be in October, all of that's guesses, nobody knows, but like anything, it's best to be prepared mentally and physically and with the gear for a resumption of catastrophic infections in your local area, because let's face it, it's the local area that really affects us most initially. We can talk about transport and all the rest of it, but right now people are getting a bit fatigued, and fatigue is a phenomenon. There's known in psychology that about 8% of all people will look at something like a pandemic and go out of their way to make it worse, for various reasons. And that's pretty much true for all issues. If 90% of the population stick by the rules, wash your hands, wear a mask, keep distancing, that 8% really can't function in their disturbing way. If the majority of the population aren't following the rules, that 8% can really disturb everybody. And it's a normal human function. 8% of people are insane, and we're definitely seeing that. One of the interesting things that you might see and hear about is that people are claiming that hair loss is associated with COVID-19 and it could be a sign of it. It's actually a sign of stress. I don't think it actually is related to this disease. I could be, I guess, but I don't think it is. I think it's stress. With a stress response, a lot of middle-aged and elderly people, and even younger people, will have alopecia. Hair will start to fall out. So I wouldn't get too concerned if your hair's falling out, but it would be a good time to look at your stress levels. They're also finding it's more associated with tall people, and they're also finding it might be associated with bald people. But that research was done looking at a limited number of patients, and let's face it, most of the patients are middle-aged and elderly men, so you would expect to see male pattern baldness. So again, if you're a tall man who's bald, don't panic, but if you're anybody at all, wash your hands, wear a mask and keep social distance. Now there has been a whole bunch of stuff on rashes, and I have covered COVID toe before, and would like to just spend some time talking about this on camera, because I think it's quite important. A Spanish study that's got some issues found 5 different types of rash. Now other researchers have found 3 types of rash. So the bottom line here is, if you have a rash, don't panic that you have COVID-19, but consider if you might have COVID-19, and is the rash atypical, is the rash unusual, and don't freak out too much. If you get some spots because you're wearing a mask, you're probably because you're wearing a mask. Now what the English research has found is 3 definitive types of rash, COVID toes being one of them. They found that the rash is present in 1 in 12 ICU patients. Now again, this is a rash symptom that is associated clearly with COVID-19. However, the study group is a convenience sample of people in the ICU. So again, if you've got a rash but you're sick enough to have a rash, and that means you have to be ventilated or on high oxygen, it's not really going to be helpful to the general public to look out for rash. But again, I would say think about atypical pink eye and things like that, and a little bit more confusion than normal, lethargy and tiredness. But again, also get familiar with depressive symptoms. We're now in basically month 6 of this, month 4 for a lot of people, and it's going to be very much progressively harder to keep locked down. Like I said, I'm going to go on vacation. We're going to a campsite. We're not going to be mingling with anybody at all. When we're staying at the place we're going to, we're going to keep social distance, and we'll be very careful with the washrooms and very careful with toileting. And I think that's really important. If you are, for whatever reason, have decided to resume going out to restaurants, either indoor or outdoor restaurants, please take a whole pile of wipes with you, and if you have N95s, use them, and if you have surgical masks, use them, and really clean that toilet and the taps and any surface you might contact with decent wipes, and let them dry for 30 seconds before you use the washroom. Bearing in mind the washroom is also a sealed area, so you really want to have the fans on in there if they have extractor fans all the time if you're a business owner. You don't want the air to be congealing in there. The other thing they found is there seems to be an ongoing hearing loss associated with COVID-19 recovered patients, and that's not really that surprising. A lot of viral infections actually will cause hearing loss. Strangely, a lot of bacterial infections can as well, and antibiotics for bacterial infections can cause hearing loss. So this has been known, but it's a significant finding that's going to impair people's ability to resume normalcy. So all of those people out there who say, I'm young and fit, I can get COVID-19, I won't die, I'll be fine. Yeah, you might be, but you might be bald, you might also be deaf, but you're also deluding yourself. Remember, 12 people are elderly and sick, 1 person isn't. Don't be that 1 person that dies because you're arrogant about your own personal immortality. Definitely people who are black, who work in healthcare and other frontline areas, and Latins and natives are actually definitely dying and getting this disease in much higher numbers than anybody else. Even when you figure in every other factor, economics, type of job, healthcare conditions, number of people in the home, all that, it's still about 2 to 3 times more likely to catch COVID-19 if you are a visible minority, which I think is really interesting. So the virus itself has not been engineered to target that population. Society is structured in such a way that it's easier for people who are visible minorities to get infected and to pass the infection along for whatever reason, and it's multifactorial. Lack of access to wide roads, lack of access to parks, lack of access to decent nutrition, possibly less education in some areas. That's a problematic thing to say, but it's systemically true, is that the lack of access to college degrees is noticeable in visible minorities. So that might be a factor, but there's many factors there. So that doesn't mean to say that if you're a short, well-haired, not ill white person, COVID cannot infect you and you cannot die from it. Absolutely it can, absolutely it will. One of the issues, I don't want to trouble people going forward with this, is I'm really concerned about this pandemic during pregnancy. If you can at all, avoid getting pregnant during this phase. Apart from the lockdown issues, apart from the risks of miscarriage, which was 4 times normal in Spanish flu, we're unsure at the moment. What I can tell you is that neonatal ICU in the Greater Toronto area is somewhat overwhelmed. We've had a large and significant rise in babies who are born who need to be ventilated and need high level ICU care. Will that transpose itself into a 4 times higher death rate for infants this year than the year before? I don't know, I hope not. But it is something to bear in mind. If you are planning to have a baby, if you can delay it 6 months or a year or 2 years, I would recommend that. So that's all from me. I'm actually going in for 3 nights. Kitty's doing 6 nights, which should tell you how bad things are. And we're not happy about it, but that's the way it is. I'm kind of mentally getting myself figured out. I figured the pandemic would blow itself out in about 3 to 7 months. It's not going to. If we get a second wave, this is going to go on and on and on. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to figure out what my next moves are. I have sufficient masks in place, probably for about a year. The masks I've been using for 4 months are starting to really deteriorate. So I'm getting to the point now where I'm thinking of retiring them and keeping them for extreme use later on. I'm also concerned about food and the economic situation quite severely, so I'm keeping an eye on that. What I'm doing at the moment is I'm actually going into austerity mode. We're going to clamp down on pretty much all of our discretionary spending. We're still going to have nice food, but we're not going to be spending quite so much money on stuff that we used to spend it on. Things like shampoos and stuff like that. Yes, it's nice to have really nice shampoos, but we have quite a lot of supply. So it seems prudent to me and Kitty, and this came from Kitty, is that we should actually stop spending as much as we can in this period of time to give ourselves the ability to function and also to deal with the upcoming expense of completing the home in the Shire. So what have you guys been up to? So where this is all going to go is going to be an interesting thing. Hopefully the protests will die down from the left and the right, because honestly it's distraction and it's dangerous. People need to get into a really serious mode on this. We are at war. This is a world war. If we don't take it that seriously and keep taking it seriously month after month after month, year after year after year, a lot of people are going to die who didn't need to. And that is the most important thing, not the GDP or the Dow, in my opinion. Remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today. And in a pandemic, tomorrow is always going to be worse than today until we're over the first wave. And the first wave is still rising. Toodles.
I think what we're seeing from the data from ONS and other data is that we have probably reached near the limits or the limits of what we can do in terms of opening up society. So what that means, potentially, is if we wish to do more things in the future, we may have to do less of some other things. But we have to be realistic about this. The idea that we can open up everything and keep the virus under control is clearly wrong.
Listen, thank you all very much indeed. And hands, face, space, get a test, self-isolate if you have symptoms. Thanks very much. I think I repeated that often enough.
This is a 2020 Lovely Cat production.